With the passing away on March the 12th, 1999, of the last true legendary violinist Yehudi Menuhin, the final page in the history of the violin in the 20th century was turned. A fabulously rich era came to a close.
If you compare violinists of today and violinists of, let's say, in the 1920s, 30s, 40s, and 50s, in my mind, or to my ear, I don't feel that one of them sounded like the other. I feel they were all individuals. Let's talk about Chrysler, Ellman, Heifetz, Francescatti, Milstein, Menuhin, Oistrakh, Stern. Everybody sounded different.
Yehudi, Heifetz, Huberman, Francescatti, Sigeti, Enesco. Ben, chacun jouait la même œuvre, ça a été comme une autre œuvre. Quand quelqu'un te dit ça c'est la version de référence, ou ça c'est comme ça, excuse-moi, c'est une insulte à la musique. Alors ça veut dire que c'est une très pauvre musique. Ça veut dire qu'il n'y a qu'une seule manière de le jouer.
Can say what makes one sound differ from another. This is, in my opinion, the individuality of the person, the strength of the pressure, the pressure of the bow on the strings, the pressure of the actual fingers on the violin, the whole position.
problem really is the difficulty of playing the violin. It's very, very difficult. It's very difficult, and you can tell the difficulty because how long does it take for a beginner, average beginner, to make a decent sound on the fiddle? And how long does it take to an average beginner to make a decent sound on the piano? No comparison. You know, you play Twinkle, Twinkle Little Star on the piano right away, and it would sound decent. Can't do that on the fiddle on the violin, unless, of course, you're some sort of genius.
The genius of Paganini, his satanic image, and his demonic virtuosity lie at the source of the contemporary art of the violin. All the giants of the 20th century, we will not deal here with chamber music, jazz, or the gypsy violin, are in one way or another descendants of Paganini.
I think there is before Paganini and after Paganini, and I think the whole music, the whole writing of music has been changed through Paganini. Paganini was, to me, was not a development in the sense that it was, let's say, Viotti, Corelli, Tati, Tata, and then Paganini, then on. I think there was all this, and then there was Paganini.
The evolution in the style of playing between, you know, a contemporary violinist and a violinist, you know, in the 40s and so on, I think has to do with what they did with the music, you know, something to do with the shifting or slides, if you want to call it. There was a different slide. There would some of those old fiddle players would slide back and forth, you know, and these days, you know, it is taboo, you know, you don't slide back and forth because you'll be called old-fashioned. And I wish I had more of those old-fashioned things. You know, when you listen to somebody like a Sigeti, you know, for me, was the most contemporary sounding fiddle player musically. He actually did not sound like what we were talking about, old, you know, the old-fashioned. He was, what made him so amazing was that he was actually, if you were to hear him today, you would not feel that his musicianship and the way that he performs a Beethoven sonata has aged at all.
Alors Sigeti, qui était une espèce de langue action, une espèce de spaghetti. Je ne peux pas me mettre debout avec tout ça qui est autour. Il était très long comme ça. Il avait de très longs bras, n'est-ce pas? Et quand on disait toujours de lui que lorsqu'on le voyait jouer, on avait l'impression qu'il était en train de jouer dans une cabine téléphonique, parce que, etc. Mais quand on entend certaines des choses, est-ce que c'est démodé? Non.
He was criticized sometimes for the very wide vibrato that he had, but it was so focused. I would say he was the aristocrat of violinists.
Mr. Joseph Szigeti.
We are going to play the Bee by Francois Schubert.
Some of the older players were very aware of what was going on around them, and others on the clips that I saw were not doing anything to help the orchestra whatsoever. They would just play what they were playing and hope the orchestra, not even hope, but just assume the orchestra would be with them, and they didn't need to show anything at all. And they would just distance themselves from everything around them and just play.
We have, when I say we, I mean the older generation, we have the right to think the way we think. I wouldn't say that the older generation are better, but let's be very frank. If the young generation are as good as they are, I think they owe us a debt of gratitude.
What impressed me about Elman, and I remember seeing a video of him playing, among other things, the Humoresque of Dvorak, was his incredible bow division, that everything was in such order. And of course, now comes, you know, the great debate about the Elman sound and what made the Elman sound.
If you look at Elman, he's a really, really small guy with very thick fingers, and he places his fingers in a way I've never seen other people place their fingers. Like, he has nails on his left hand, like, it looks like a guitarist's hand, you know. So he sort of grew his nails, I think, to give himself support so that when he put his fingers down flat, since his fingers had a lot of meat in them anyway, I couldn't do it, but, you know, he could put them down flat and get a full vibrato swing. And it's really interesting to see that, because he plays with the violin up, his fingers flat, and he's really short, so his arms are very short. So he's playing all the way out here like this, and he has to lower the scroll just to get into a high position.
Elman was so incredibly concerned with the way his violin sounded, because he was so sensitive to sound, that he would actually go, I don't know, once, twice a week to the violin adjuster and move the sound post.
I think that I probably do practice every morning with my pianist, Mr. Zeiger, about 2 hours, 2.5 hours.
And one day the story goes like this. He says, you know, upon they're rehearsing, and Misha tells Joseph, I can see that. Joseph, you're not playing in time. So he says, Maestro, but I am playing that. Let's do it again, you know. So they do it again. Stops him again. He says, you're not playing in time. But Maestro, I am playing in time. He says, maybe you're playing in time, but not in my time. The plague of his life was Heifetz, because, okay, Heifetz was 10 years younger, and Heifetz was this and that, okay. And before Heifetz, he was, you know, he sold more records than practically anybody else.
Elman suffered from Heifetz disease. That was his problem. And fortunately or unfortunately, when Heifetz came on the scene, everybody suffered from the same kind of disease, which is, there is Heifetz, you know, what, you know, and all of a sudden everybody had to compare themselves to this incredible phenomenon. I remember listening to him, and I could not close my mouth for like a week. I couldn't believe what I was listening to. It was, and he of course looked very cool on the stage. You know, he didn't move much. He just moved what was necessary, and that was, in my estimation, the reason that people called him very cold.
And people would say, for example, about Heifetz, he was cold. Close your eyes and listen.
What you heard was, for me, I could describe it as like a tornado moving in one place, just staying, you know, with the most incredible heat coming out.
The thing was in the playing. How would you define? I could say that Joseph Hasid, in some ways, could have been more perfect in some ways. Milstein also sometimes. Heifetz did from time to time a note which wasn't exactly that. Thanks God. You know the story with the Baronet Shaw, who wrote to him a letter, please do some false notes that we know that you are human.
The sound was, it had a kind of a edge to it that in the concert hall just carried in the most beautiful, there was a lot of beauty to the sound, which actually does not exist as much on the recordings, because he insisted on having the microphone quite close. So you heard all of that, I know my old teacher used to call it the zhit sound, that zh right there, which got lost in the hall and just was a luminous, wonderful, wonderful sound.
Heifetz is getting a free concert inside. Hey, guy! I'm just getting a free concert inside.
Part of Heifetz's tone production has to do with bow speed. He moved the bow very, very quickly. He did not use sort of as much bow pressure. This was a Russian way of doing it, you know, to moving the bow very, very quick and then getting this incredible edge to the sound.
I think since Heifetz and I guess Milstein as well, but particularly Heifetz, who could play so brilliantly and so cleanly, and you can hear every single note. It's not like it sounds brilliant and perfect, and then you listen closer and some notes are missing, or some notes are just kind of passed over quickly. With Heifetz, it was all there.
Particularly when he played a concerto by Tchaikovsky, concerto by Wieniawski, works like that which suited him to perfection. He played certain things, even the chaconne by Vitali. There is so much drama there, which is so expressive and so impressive. It makes you shudder almost. But of course, when it came to the classics, then that's a different world entirely.
You can like, not like, you can agree, not agree necessarily with everything that happens, but Heifetz was unique. There's no doubt.
Sometimes I think that's so silly for a grown-up person come out on the stage and scratch the violin. Really, I mean it. That's serious what I say.
That's what he says, but Nathan Milstein doesn't mean it. He's been playing for more than 60 years and is one of the supreme violinists of our age, a master of his instrument.
Nobody had the kind of concept of cleanliness of articulation that Milstein did, and he was absolutely, he was as intense as Elman was about tone. That's how intense Milstein was about articulation and cleanliness of between the notes.
Parce que lui, il passait tout son temps à chercher tout le temps. Chaque fois que je venais chez lui à la maison, je disais, tu sais, j'ai trouvé ça, regarde, c'est un nouveau truc, là, etc. Tout le temps, il cherchait. C'était comme un petit un horloger.
With him, it was a way of life. With him, it was, give me the fiddle and I'll just play it all the time. I'll just play it all the time. All the time, I'll doodle, practice, doodle, do little things, investigate, try and see, let me see which passage, which fingering I should use that make the passage sound cleaner, some more articulated.
All the time he used all kinds of tricks, all new things. Like, he would come, like, I would come to his house. At one time he lived in Paris for several months. We saw each other practically every night, every day, I'd come here, I just found this.
That's a circus poker or something. Not at all, not at all. It's a military band passing the street in the small village. Let's go home.
Well, you could not love him if you knew him. I mean, he was, I don't know, I see there a little sign here, that I don't know on the page, I don't know why, but it says perfect. He was.
And he was absolutely nonchalant, kind of, that was a cool character when it came to playing the violin.
Moi, je ne sais pas ce que ça veut dire difficile. Quand on joue, on sait jouer, on ne peut pas jouer. Je ne peux pas penser à ce que je fais. Si on commence à penser à ce qu'on doit faire...
You are Jewish yourself,
Yes,
aren't you?
yes.
Why do Jewish musicians, why do they make good executive musicians, performers, suppose.
I know many Jewish musicians that are not good.
Yes, but apart from Mendelssohn, there haven't been
I
any...
don't think it has to do with the race in that respect.
You
It's
don't?
only conditioning, I think. I think it's more the social background that made some Jews take to the violin or piano.
Why did you leave Russia?
Why I left Russia?
Because you didn't leave till 1925, did you?
25, yes, I left because, well, many people would, they go, I could leave, and I left. I went to play and study, and then I didn't come back.
He, Horowitz, and Piatigorsky, three young urchins from Russia, you know, in 1934 left Russia and went to, I think they went to Berlin first, and they used to play apparently in café and things like that, in, I don't know, bordellos, I don't know what, you know, to earn the living. You know, and they came out with a friend of theirs who was called Mairovich, who was their manager, so to say, you know. You know, imagine what a trio that was, kind of thing, you know. Horowitz, Vladimir Gorovitz, Gregor Piatigorsky, and Nathan Milstein.
Were you actually a child prodigy? You played the Glazunov at a very early age.
I couldn't be prodigy because it wasn't good, I'm sure. The prodigy is supposed to play well. I'm sure I didn't play well.
You have to start playing the violin as a child. Absolutely. You grow into it. Obviously, you have to develop the talent, but the real talent has to be born.
C'est maman qui m'a poussé. C'est maman qui m'a entraîné, qui a senti que j'étais un violoniste né.
Oh oui, il faisait tout ce que je lui disais, il était très obéissant. Quand il a pris son petit violon à 5 ans, c'est une merveille. Il a joué la gamme de sol à 3 octaves.
Tu te rappelles de ça?
Non.
Pourtant, ça remonte assez loin, ça.
Extraordinaire. Ah oui.
Dino Francescati. Ben, si tu as toute la Méditerranée, rien que dans ce nom-là.
J'ai l'attirance pour une belle sonorité. J'ai
l'attirance pour tout ce qui est vrai, tout ce qui brille, tout ce qui est beau, pour le soleil. Alors je mets ça dans ma musique, je mets ça dans mon violon.
C'était un méditerranéen, était lumineuse. Oui, c'était le bel canto de violon, mais c'était magnifique.
J'aime qu'on m'entende, si je parle, c'est pour qu'on m'entende, si on ne m'entend pas, c'est pas la peine.
Francis Satie était un grand violoniste. Un homme charmant et simple, très simple.
Si j'avais pas été un violoniste, j'aurais été un jardinier. J'aime ça.
Dès le moment qu'on a cru, on a pu percevoir qu'il y avait un peu de talent de petit garçon, alors c'est la tyrannie qui commence. Tout le monde commence à s'affairer. Et le petit garçon que j'ai été, ou que peut-être les autres aussi, où est-ce qu'il pouvait se réfugier? Dans cet instrument, en s'enfermant dans sa chambre, en dialoguant avec cet instrument. J'ai passé des heures à improviser dans ma chambre. Évidemment, j'improvisais aussi pour tricher, parce que ma mère faisait la cuisine à côté avec la côtelette Pajarski, comme ça. Et moi, j'étais en train d'improviser en lisant des bandes dessinées. Elle pensait que j'étais en train de travailler mon violon.
Like all masters of the violin, Ruggiero Ricci was already an accomplished performer by the age of 12. But not all child prodigies are destined for a great career. Fate is not always kind to them. Barely into his teens, Boris Goldstein was considered by his peers to be one of the great hopes of Soviet violin. Was it political circumstances, war, or simply bad luck which prevented his brilliant early years from blossoming into a real career? In the West, the lives of two young, dazzling violinists ended tragically. After a brief but brilliant career, Michael Rabin died of a drug overdose in New York in 1972, still in his youth. The terrible pressures which sensation-seeking middlemen inflict upon child prodigies were too much for him to bear.
Ladies and gentlemen, it's with a great deal of pleasure that I present to you a very wonderful, wonderful young violinist from the concert stage, 15-year-old Michael Rabin, ladies and gentlemen. Well, let me tell you something, ladies and gentlemen. This is really one of the great wonders of show business, and I believe that young Michael Rabin has a great future. How about it, ladies?
Fantastic violinist, a wonderful sound, and real tragedy that he died so young before his time.
Another prodigy destined for a brilliant career met with a similarly tragic end. Joseph Hasid, about whom the distinguished pianist Gerald Moore wrote, "With the possible exception of Menuhin, he is the most incandescent talent I have ever heard." Hasid was born in Poland and made a spectacular debut in London in 1940 at the age of 16.
Il avait des doigts avec des coussins, il avait des coussinets, là, c'était du velours.
3 years after his first appearance, he fell silent. He was committed to a psychiatric clinic for schizophrenia.
Il est devenu... Il était peut-être déjà dérangé avant, parce que pour jouer comme il jouait, on ne pouvait pas être normal.
Joseph Hasid never performed on stage again. He died in 1950 as the result of a lobotomy. He was 26. A few heart-rending recordings are all that remain of his art.
If somebody has a wonderful career past the age of 40, I think it's a bloody miracle. It really is. So many things can go wrong. to keep it up and to do it. It's very difficult. It's tough.
In the tradition of Paganini, Sarasate, and Wieniawski, all the great virtuosos of the past, right up to Fritz Kreisler and George Enesco, composed for the violin. Among these giants, on the subject of whom sadly no sound film has been traced, no one more than Eugène Ysaÿe left the imprint of his violinist soul on his musical compositions.
J'ai entendu les rares enregistrements qu'il y a de Eugène Ysaÿe et c'est quelqu'un qui m'a toujours fasciné par la musique qu'il a écrite, que je connaissais avant de découvrir ses enregistrements. Dans ces 6 sonates, on sent une grande... un discours rhapsodique, une grande liberté, une grande imagination, un sens des couleurs, un instinct de violoniste exacerbé, en même temps qu'une réflexion de compositeur.
Je suis venu chez Ysaÿe en 1926 parce qu'en Russie, vous savez, nous connaissons toujours que quand il venait, on disait, pour Kreisler, on disait le roi des violonistes. Pour Ysaÿe, c'était pas suffisant, le roi. Alors on disait tsar.
Today, there are so many violinists that play really wonderfully, and that are not great violinists. And that was something, I mean, Isai was obviously a great violinist. Of that there can be no doubt whatsoever. Great violinists, as I've known, Ionesco and others, they have had a great control of vibrato, for instance. They could control, they had so many different speeds, different amplitudes, different powers, and very often you find wonderful violinists with one vibrato. And Ionesco had a range of slides, which was quite amazing. More different kinds of slides than any other violinist I've ever known. Any kind of portamento that a tenor would use, to sliding from below the note to hitting the note with the finger on top of it, and or changing fingers in the middle of a slide. He didn't have perhaps quite the command that Oistrakh had, but he was a great violinist because whatever he played was absolutely inspiring, shattering, overwhelming, real, genuine, not a note was wrong, and he had this in an innate way which was quite extraordinary. Chrysler had greatness in that it was a very personal style, which was always, how shall I say, always cultivated. I don't think Chrysler had the full range of demonic to the most elegant and courteous. He had the elegance and the courtesy, but he didn't go to the demonic.
What makes or breaks a Chrysler piece, you talk about Liebeslied, Liebesfreude, is the timing and the pace. And that's what Chrysler did so magnificently. Nobody played with more warmth and intimacy than Chrysler. You know, if you were to compare the sound of Chrysler to the sound of Heifetz, Heifetz would be like a knight in armor, you know, galloping towards the sunset, while Chrysler would be, you know, somebody with more intimacy, who would be more quiet, and who would just have an inner warmth in his playing. I feel comfortable listening to Chrysler play with piano, because I find, first of all, the most beautiful sound. But I always found that he was a kind of a inward, kind of intimate, gemütlich kind of fiddle player. You know, that you're sitting in a lovely drawing room and he plays the most beautiful gems and pearls.
Fritz Kreisler, the last of the violinist composers, enjoyed a long and glorious career. By contrast, Ginette Neveu's career was tragically brief. But before her death in an air crash in 1949, at the age of 30, she too had won everyone's heart.
I remember distinctly my first encounter and my first vision of Ginette Neveu, because I wanted to laugh when I first saw her. I didn't know why. Then she picked up the violin and began to play. Well, I would like to assure everybody, I didn't laugh anymore. I set the stunt. She really hypnotized you with her presence, with what we now call charisma. I suppose she had that charisma, that conviction, which she absolutely transferred into her listener, that this is the only way and there is no other way, whatever she played. And this was so hypnotizing.
Moi, je l'appelais toujours le gladiateur, parce qu'elle avait des espèces d'épaules comme ça, et puis quand elle avait une chemise comme ça, on voyait ses épaules énormes avec la marque de violon ici, et puis elle parlait comme ça.
I expected her to be sort of brilliant and, I guess, sort of very graceful looking, very feminine, and a real, like, knockout player. But she was almost exactly the opposite of what I expected to see, because in the excerpt, it was at the end of the chanson, her eyes were just glued on the conductor, and she looked very intense.
Lorsqu'elle terminait la fin du troisième mouvement de César Franck, ce do dièse un peu plus bas comme ça. C'était de la couleur. Peut-être qu'il y aura des gens aujourd'hui qui n'oseraient pas peut-être jouer ça un peu plus bas, parce que ce n'est pas juste. Mais qu'est-ce que c'est la justesse? Thibaut, la même chose. Dans la Kreuz. Dans le troisième Weise. Ce ré bémol, il disait un peu plus bas comme ça. Tu peux le jouer juste. Casals faisait ça tout le temps, la justesse, comme ça. Qu'est-ce que c'est, tu vois? C'était des gens qui faisaient de la couleur.
Color, a highly personal way of savoring each note, distinguished the style of Jacques Thibaut, the most famous of French violinists. Menuhin spoke with great admiration of his inborn ability to handle a phrase without asking permission of the metronome.
allais, par exemple, travailler avec lui vers 11 heures du matin. J'arrivais chez lui, il portait une espèce de robe de chambre un peu dépnaillée, comme ça. Il avait une cigarette qui lui tombait du bout de lèvres. Et il a peut-être même pris un petit verre de, je sais pas, whisky. Ok, enfin. Et il était là en train de jouer comme ça. Et c'était ça la leçon. La leçon était que c'était un homme fait violon, un violon devenu homme.
For me, you know, something about the sound is what you hear in your ear, what you hear in your head, and somehow it goes into the physical aspect of it. Because I feel if you don't hear it, you're not going to do it. Or if you hear it and you can't do it, you're going to quit.
J'ai passé des heures, quelquefois, à imaginer ici le son que j'entendais à l'intérieur de moi-même et d'essayer de ne sortir le son au violon que lorsque ça concordait absolument avec ce qu'il y avait dedans. Évidemment, c'est une science. Évidemment, c'est un travail énorme.
You take, for example, somebody like Stern, who, even as a young man, was already sounding differently. It's almost like he was saying, you know, I don't want to sound like all these old guys. I'm going to sound like me. And so you can hear in the slides, you can hear in the shift. It's Isaac. It's totally different. There is a kind of a purity to it. He could really turn a phrase with simplicity that would make it eloquent.
Ce que j'aime chez Isaac Stern, c'est le côté rock du violon. Il a un son qui n'est pas toujours d'une pureté ou d'une précision, mais c'est ça qui fait sa spécificité, je trouve. Il a aussi une manière de jouer faux qui sonne juste.
There is a romantic emotional involvement, and there is a pure emotional involvement. Of course, he would be very, very dramatic. There's an old joke about Heifetz, where after a concert, some lady comes to him and she says, "Oh, Mr. Heifetz, your violin sounded so magnificent today." And he picks the violin and he said, "Funny, I don't hear anything."
There is in the very nature of the violin as an instrument an element of mythical, even mystical resonance.
For 5,000 guineas, thank you. 6,000, 7,000.
All the great virtuosos have played on violins by Stradivarius or Guarnerius del Gesù, magnificent instruments which are often given the credit for the sound their players produce from them.
For 13,000 guineas. 14,000. 14,500. Any more?
Quand j'avais 13 ans, un homme très gentil m'a permis de choisir mon premier grand instrument, le Kievenhüller, que Stradivari a fait quand il avait 90 ans. Il y avait encore des Stradivari dont le prix était à la portée, même des mécènes. Aujourd'hui, les prix des anciens instruments dépassent toute mesure.
It's cheap, though, isn't it? Cheap? Inside here, it says 1737. That's the year.
C'est le Stradivarius de 1716, qui vient d'une collection Stockholm. C'est là-bas que j'ai acquis celui-là.
Nathan Milstein was a Strad man. He only played on Strads, while somebody like Heifetz tried Strads, but he was basically always played on Del Gesù.
Alors, maintenant, est-ce qu'on pourrait demander à Leonid Kogan de nous montrer son violon? Je sais que pour un artiste tel que lui, c'est presque une part de lui-même.
Vous avez trouvé la bonne formule. C'est même la partie majeure d'un violoniste, le violon.
Et ça n'est pas un Stradivarius. Qu'est-ce que c'est exactement?
Это Guarnerius del Gesù.
De quelle année?
1733 года.
1733.
I think that Oistrakh, who had a wonderful sound, did not play on a particularly wonderful violin. He played a Strad, but it was not one of the great Strads, but yet he produced magnificent sound from it.
Имя Марсик Страдивариус.
Sie heißt Marsi Stradivarius.
Марсик.
Marsic.
Она принадлежала знаменитому профессору французскому Марсику.
Sie hat gehört der berühmten Professor Marsi.
It was a good fiddle, but nothing. So, again, which again brings you the same conclusion, that the sound comes from the individual, not from the instrument.
И качество инструмента важно, и состояние инструмента. Вообще инструменты итальянские, старые инструменты, они достаточно капризны. Они очень, так сказать, чутки к изменениям климатическим, атмосферным и так далее.
Atmosphärische Änderungen, die Atmosphäre und die Veränderungen.
Так что нужно, в общем, относиться к ним как к любимому ребенку.
C'est comme mon fils, c'est comme mon frère, c'est mon ami.
Eh bien, je suis très heureux de pouvoir posséder ces deux violons qui me permettent d'exprimer tant de sentiments.
Il y a une différence sensible entre l'un et l'autre?
Ma foi, oui. Le Strad, un son plus clair, plus brillant. Le Guarnerius, en échange, il a un son plus sombre. Je ne dirais pas... plus profond. Non, le Strad aussi a beaucoup de profondeur. Mais c'est deux mondes merveilleux et deux mondes que je suis tellement heureux de pouvoir habiter. Dans n'importe quelle circonstance, je suis emparé, n'est-ce pas? Je suis protégé, je suis appuyé, je suis inspiré.
J'ai un violon ici qui est né en 1713. Il vivait long avant moi et j'espère qu'il vivra long après moi. Et moi, je ne considérais pas que ce violon est mon violon. Je suis peut-être son violoniste plutôt. Je ne suis qu'un passager dans sa vie.
for me, Schering was like a chameleon. He sounded like everybody. Good. But it's like everybody.
It's not that his playing lacks character. It's just, it's very well thought out and in very good taste, and it's really exquisite. So I don't think that there's anything lacking in it whatsoever.
I would always have a problem figuring out who it was. So I always have a thing with my wife. I said, who is playing? Well, I don't know who it is. Ah, it must be Schering. Because it's good.
And probably for me, his Bach was the most consistent with what I was looking for in Bach.
Violinists have a harder time to make pure music than pianists, because pianists cannot really do that much on the piano. They are immediately forced to turn the phrase. They don't have to deal with vibrato, they don't have to deal with shifting, they don't have to deal with sliding, they don't have to deal with bow speed. They got to deal with an instrument that basically you put down the key and you get a sound. And if you play a few notes in a row and they sound blah, you have to deal with music immediately. Fiddle players don't have to deal with music. Also, another thing that fiddle players have to deal with is an intonation. So pianists don't have to deal with that, with all of that. So they're immediately forced to think of a phrase. We don't have to think of a phrase right away. You know, we thank God that we can play something that would sound decent and in tune and without a scratch. So a lot of, you know, so some of the fiddle players, you know, sometimes stayed with the kind of concentration on all of the things that really take to make a violin sound good. And by the time you mastered all of that, you're 95 years old. It's no time for music. So those fiddle players who could do both, those are the great ones.
It was kind of funny to see someone like Kogan play. He looked, I don't know, in a way he almost looked kind of panicked or uncomfortable when he was playing, but his playing didn't sound that way. I don't know if there's unity between Kogan and Oistrak's playing. I think there is a connection in sort of the seriousness they bring to their playing.
Вы знаете, даже маленькие дети в центральной музыкальной школе, им, так сказать, ну, знаете, вот так говорилось, так думалось, во всяком случае, вот будешь заниматься, будешь, как Ойстрах, будешь ездить, посмотришь, пойдешь в Америку. Америка это была, в общем, ну, дальше, чем созвездие Скорпиона. Я всегда к Ойстраху относился, обожествляя его. Потому что еще во время войны, когда я был мальчишкой, в Оренбурге эвакуировали, во время холода и голода, я по радио слушал очень часто рондо капричозо Сен-Санса в исполнении Давида Ойстраха. Я, знаете, ухом прилипал к этой самой громкоговорителю, так называемому, для того, чтобы слышать каждую ноту. Вот с тех пор у меня была мечта познакомиться с Ойстрахом. Гениальнейший скрипач, это король скрипачей.
I think I was like 16 or 17 years old, and I went to a recital, and he slayed me. He was my favorite fiddle player for like a year. You know, I would go through a lot of, I would go through a Heifetz period, a Milstein period, but Oistrach was somebody that actually I never fell out of love with. I just loved the way he played the fiddle. I loved his sound, I loved his phrasing.
I don't think his playing is necessarily geared towards charm or towards real rapport with the audience as far as just trying to draw them into the performance. But I think people get drawn in listening to him by sort of sheer force of will.
His external appearance could be too easily misjudged. And yet I don't think his face can be misjudged. His expression, the wonderful freedom of the neck, the way he looks up and plays.
Like, he played with so much weight in his sound. Like, also just the way he looked, he was just so solid. He was right there, and he was completely in command without looking like it was any problem for him whatsoever. It was just naturally, everything was, at his fingers and completely under control.
I've never seen fingers change on a bow stroke at the frog as quickly as his does. I know when I saw him once and I said, my staccato, it'll never be yours, it's much too slow. Oh, he said, you could learn that in 3 months. You'll discover it in 3 months. But I didn't. He was a man of incredible integrity. I only knew very few such artists. Some were free because they wanted to indulge themselves. Some were unimaginative and wonderful calculators. So they calculated the effects which came off and were wonderful in their way. Each time the same effect in the same way, predictable, and after all, eclipses are predictable too. They're part of the great laws of nature. But there are two schools, the one that's utterly predictable and the other that's utterly abandoned. But he married, Oistrakh married the two.
Menuhin was the ultimate wunderkind on anything. Probably people will say, well, what about Mozart? Well, okay, well, that was a little bit back.
Yehudi était devenu la légende de Isaac Babel à Odessa. Tu connais le conte d'Isaac Babel qui disait dans chaque famille juive à Odessa, il y avait un petit garçon qui allait devenir le messie du violon.
A 12-year-old boy comes to the Berlin Philharmonic and plays Bach, Beethoven, and Brahms. That is already amazing in itself, such a feat. Is it conceivable that a boy of 12 could master 3 such concerti in such a masterful way?
It was the most heartfelt and straight to your heart kind of playing that anybody has ever heard.
There is only one word I could use in connection with Yehudi: magic.
Menuhin was the most natural player. Totally natural. Technically, sound-wise, tone-wise, it was natural. You listen to something like his, there's some recording of the Ronde de Lutin of Bazzini. Nobody better. With that interesting sound. It had like so many layers of color.
virtuosité, je n'ai rien contre. Je l'admire, je l'acclame, je trouve c'est magnifique. L'artisanat aussi poussé, une maîtrise aussi merveilleuse, c'est une chose à admirer et à cultiver. Mais il arrive un moment où cette même virtuosité se détruit parce qu'elle a besoin justement de la nourriture de la musique. Quand la musique ne nourrit pas la virtuosité se détruit.
One of the great things about Menuhin was his sound. The sound had a life to it that one cannot not describe. And he always had that sound, you know, all the time, whether he had a bad day or a good day or whatever it is. His sound was always something. It was like, you know, it's like a fingerprint. You know, that's you. That was him. And of course, he was always so, I don't know, people like to call it human kind of playing, but he would go right to your heart with whatever he played. It was a very, very special kind of player that it had a I don't know if you want to call it a humbleness.
Yes, Heifetz was a kind of a god, yes. Different than Yehudi in that respect, because Yehudi, in a way, was nearer, in a way. He was the angel who came down on earth.